Hello, my name is Nicholas Cohen. I'm a primary care doctor with a practice in downtown San Francisco. I created HealthScore. HealthScore is a comprehensive program to optimize health and extend life. In my over 10 years of practice, I've been able to help improve the health and support increased lifespan for thousands of patients. Now, HealthScore is available to the general public, to anyone who wants to optimize their health and extend their life. HealthScore is based on 31 recommendations in 4 domains: psychological health, sleep and activity, nutrition, and your numbers, or biometrics. These 31 recommendations have been identified in the peer-reviewed medical literature in the last 10 years and are the most important contributors to health and longevity. Today we're discussing, in the domain of sleep and activity, the recommendation to sit for less than 30 minutes at a time when you do sit. Let's start with the definition. The recommendation is to sit for no longer than 30 minutes at a time when you do sit. In the last lesson, we talked about limiting the total duration of sitting to not more than 8 hours per day. But it's also important that in those less than 8 hours of sitting, you break up each bout or episode of sitting so that you're not sitting for more than 30 minutes at a time when you do sit. A bout of sitting is a period of sitting not interrupted by standing for more than 1 minute. So let's say you're standing for 30 minutes and then you get up for a minute and you sit back down, then you've interrupted that first bout of sitting. You haven't exceeded the 30-minute threshold. So what's the evidence that the actual duration of the bouts of sitting throughout the day matter for your health? Here's the evidence showing the connection between sitting bout duration and risk of death. This is the study, and it's available in PDF format in the resources section of this lecture. The study was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine. It's a prospective cohort study. It was published in September 2017. It included 7,985 adults, and the median follow-up period was 4 years. The outcome was that the group that sat most often for longer than 30 minutes had a 50% increased risk of mortality. Let's look at what they found. They divided the population into quartiles, and everybody was wearing an accelerometer. They analyzed the accelerometers to determine when people sat, how often that bout of sitting was longer than 30 minutes. And there were 4 quartiles. There was a group that less than 42% of their sitting bouts were over 30 minutes. There was a group that 42 to 52% of the time when they sat it was over 30 minutes. There was a group that had 53 to 62% of the time when they sat it was over 30 minutes. And then there was a group that when they sat, it was 63% or more of the time longer than 30 minutes. Compared to the group that less than 42% of the time was sitting for longer than 30 minutes when they sat, the group that was 63 or more percent of the time sitting for longer than 30 minutes when they sat had a 50% increased risk in mortality in that 4-year follow-up period. How exactly does the duration of bout of sitting affect risk of premature death? There are several mechanisms, and these mechanisms are describing the effect of sitting in general, whether it be the total duration for the day or the duration of individual bouts of sitting. A few things are going on here. Let's talk about them. There's decreased lipoprotein lipase activity. This leads to decreased uptake of free fatty acids into skeletal muscle and adipose tissue. What that results in is an abnormal lipid profile, increased triglycerides, decreased HDL cholesterol, and those two combined result in an increased risk of heart disease. So you've got more cholesterol floating around in the bloodstream rather than being taken up by tissues. And the result is that more cholesterol can clog the coronary arteries and lead to heart attacks and stroke. The next enzyme that's affected is the muscle glucose transporter, or GLUT activity. What this enzyme is responsible for is transporting glucose, or sugar in the blood, up into the skeletal muscles. So when this enzyme is not functioning, it takes more insulin for your muscles to pick up the sugar in the bloodstream. And that leads to the cells no longer responding to insulin. This does two things. It leads to obesity, because although you eat, you're never able to absorb the glucose, so you're always hungry. And it also leads to diabetes, which results from insulin resistance. The pancreas has to pump out so much insulin because the cells are desensitized that the pancreas eventually quits and you develop diabetes. And finally, decreased bone mineral density. You're not using your legs, you're not using your spine, your bones will start to decrease in strength, and this can lead to hip fractures, and hip fractures are a major cause of morbidity and mortality in the elderly. So we've discussed the importance of limiting the time you sit to not more than 30 minutes. We described the overall effect on mortality, and we described the mechanism where it leads to these health problems. Now, what can you do about it? Well, fortunately, standing for just 1 minute will cancel out the harmful effects of sitting. It resets the clock on the bout of sitting duration. So technically, you could just, if you're keeping your total sitting time under 30 minutes, you could just stand up for a minute every 30 minutes. And a lot of my patients will suggest exactly that. They'll offer to use their Apple Watch or Fitbit to remind them to stand. The problem is that the Apple Watch and Fitbit go off every hour at 50 minutes into the hour. They tell you to stand or to get more steps. This means you've already been sitting for 50 minutes, and by then it's too late. I've tried, but I've not been able to figure out how to adjust the notification so it's every 30 minutes. But if you wait till 50 minutes, by then it's too late. So this technique is not ideal. Then people will say, okay, I'll use a timer on my phone. Well, the point is, we're talking about establishing a lifelong habit. Do you think that for the rest of your life, you're going to want an alarm to go off every 30 minutes telling you to stand? And do you think over a lifetime you're going to actually keep getting up for that buzzer? Probably after a few weeks, you'll turn off the alarm clock. The point I'm trying to make is that, once again, it's easier to stand, to have that be your default, and not get up and down like a jack-in-the-box every 30 minutes when you hear something ring or see a pop-up notification. Standing up like a jack-in-the-box every 30 minutes is probably not a habit that's going to last, whereas using a standing desk alternatively could very well be, because it takes a conscious effort maybe once in the morning, but not every 30 minutes throughout the day. So rather than trying to remind yourself every 30 minutes, what I personally do is I use a standing desk all the time. So I don't have episodes that typically will last for longer than 30 minutes. Those episodes are rare. And when they do occur, I'm aware of the fact that I'm sitting. So for instance, if I'm on a flight, that's a time when I know I'm going to be sitting for 30 minutes. That's when I have to make a conscious effort to book an aisle seat, to get up and walk, or go to the restroom at 30-minute intervals. But for the rest of my day and the rest of my life, I'm not having to think about this study or have a reminder go off every 30 minutes because I'm already standing. That's my recommendation. There are other strategies you can apply if you're on the road a lot, like taking breaks. It can be inconvenient and may discourage you to live closer to your work or drive less and use public transportation where you can stand on the bus or in the train. But the overall goal is to limit the frequency that you sit for longer than 30 minutes. Let's look at some frequently asked questions. If I go to the gym regularly, doesn't this cancel out sitting at my desk all day? Actually not. So the studies looked at the duration of people's total sitting time, the duration of bouts of sitting, and whether or not they met the exercise goals of 150 minutes of aerobic exercise of moderate intensity a week or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity a week, plus the 2 sessions of strength training. So though the worst off group were the ones that sat all the time and didn't do aerobic or strength training, there was still a mortality benefit for those who, despite doing the moderate intensity aerobic exercise or vigorous intensity, and despite doing the strength training, they were sitting all day. So the best off group were the ones that were both meeting the exercise recommendations and avoiding and meeting the recommendations for sitting. But there was still a harm from sitting even if you were getting in your exercise recommendations. The next question I get is, if sitting is so bad, what about lying down? Well, lying down, unfortunately, is not any better. The point is you're not contracting your calf muscles, your skeletal muscles in your body. That affects the lipoprotein lipase activity, and that affects the glut transporter, as we discussed. So lying down would be just as bad as sitting when it comes to your health. In summary, I talked about the recommendation to limit bouts of sitting to not longer than 30 minutes. We discussed the health benefits of avoiding prolonged sitting. We talked about how it's easier to make standing a habit if it's done at a standing desk rather than counting on yourself to have the willpower and the perseverance to remind yourself every 30 minutes to stand. I hope these tips have been helpful. I hope you're able to achieve this goal, and I wish you the best of luck in your journey to optimal health. I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.